once Ukraine is starting to fall apart on the front lines, they would also simultaneously step up pressure in other areas. That is to knock out the economy, go after the political leadership, perhaps. Again, just a theory so far, but do you see this being the end game of the Russians, as opposed to trying to take out the political leadership when the Ukrainian army is standing strong, because then they can simply be replaced? Are they just tearing it down and then going after everything at the same time? Sorry, a lot of questions there.
We're on the same wavelength. Just before you opened the statement about Klitschko, it's exactly what I was about to say. It was dramatic, and what was dramatic about it is precisely why they should leave. Because in a city like Kiev with a lot of high-rise buildings, they have no water, they have no electricity. People are like will want to be maudlin about this. Say, oh, it's in the middle of winter, they're cutting up. Well, wait a minute. In the middle of summer, it isn't too great if you live on the 20th floor of an apartment building and there's no electricity. You can't get there. So the point is they're making the city uninhabitable, which is their intention. They would, as to, do they want to save lives by that, to clear out people for an attack, a leveling attack? I don't think so. What Russians have been saying for some time, this goes back more than a year, when they were speaking about revenge for the attacks on the neighboring oblasts to the east of Kharkov, which were being fed from Kharkov, that Russia should level Kharkov to the ground. And you do this by giving notification 3 days in advance, everybody clear out, because we're going to destroy it. So I think going back to their most destructive dreams, Russian patriots had no intention of killing millions of people, and their intention was to give a warning. And as we see, I think it's quite likely that Putin gave a warning to Zelensky before firing the Oreshniks. And I'd say plural because it's not clear if it was one or several, and the other massive attacks that took place yesterday. They can give this warning because they're confident that nothing can stop their missiles, cruise or ballistic missiles, hypersonic in particular. So I think that they would be very happy to send another 10 million Ukrainians running to Germany, to make the system of relief so untenable in Central Europe that they would have to go to the negotiated table with Russia. I think that certainly is in their plans. Leveling cities for the sake of leveling cities, I don't think is their intent. But to frighten people and drive them out of the country, yes, I think so. It destroys the economy and it destroys Europe. Europe has no room for another 10 million Ukrainians. And it would simply break the social services and the medical services to have all of these countless Ukrainians showing up at our doors. So yes, the Russians are getting very destructive. They've moved into the China shop and they're throwing everything to the ground. It's been a long time coming. And it's just surprising that I think what you and I have discussed deterrence. I think we are witnessing now the revival of Russian deterrence, because the wherewithal was there. What was in doubt and really deserved to be in doubt was a will there to use the wherewithal. And what we are seeing now in these several actions, well, the Oreshnik has confirmed that it happened. The seizure of the ships we wait to see whether it's as described, but the Russians are clearly showing that they have the will to take on the United States and the West.
Well, I've been saying this for months, that we are now seeing the end of the war, and just as you see in other wars, the worst devastation happens towards the final stage. You saw this with the Germans in World War II as well. This is when the vast majority of the military casualties are inflicted. It's as the army falls apart. This is also when the civilians becomes more exposed as well. And this is when people start fleeing their homes. I mean, it's very so incredibly predictable that a massive tragedy is about to play out if we don't start to negotiate in good faith with the Russians. And that means do not demand to, like they did in Paris now, that you're going to send troops after the war and set up military facilities. I mean, this is why the Russians invaded, to prevent NATO from entrenching itself in Ukraine. And somehow, in defeat, our demand is that NATO should entrench itself in Ukraine. It doesn't make any sense. And I made this point for a long time that this horror would start to play out soon. And I was always told, this is Russian propaganda. Ukraine is winning. But surely our political leaders, as despite being incompetent and immoral, they must nonetheless see what is about to play out, because for all this idea of standing with Ukraine, surely there must be below all the efforts to weaponize all this fake empathy, there must be some recognition that, at least for their own self-interest, that millions of Ukrainians fleeing into Europe at the time when we would like to start to send them back, that this is not in their interest, it's not in our interest either, that is in Europe's interest. I mean, it doesn't, none of this makes any sense to me. I was, well, just taking me to my last question though. If there is an effort to end this war, it doesn't look like we're ending it, because let's be honest, it's not as if the European countries going to make peace with Russia and, okay, we're not going to expand NATO, we're going to come to some agreement with a common European security architecture. Instead, it seems like we're going to go into a different phase. I'm not sure we're going to support some guerrilla tactics or what it is that they might do, but do you see an end to this war, or is it, or if we just want to create a new phase, what would this actually look like?
Well, again, to divide this between what may happen or is likely to happen and what I would like to happen, which are
Yeah,
very
that's
different
those are
things,
different things.
which are,
Yeah.
which are very different things. I think what's most likely to happen will be frozen conflict, but not a frozen conflict as it was described going back a year and a half or 2 years by the West, that it would be like Korea, yes, and then they would have their Western military installations to defend rump Ukraine and so forth. No, it'll be a different type of frozen conflict, very specific one, in which Russia takes all of Ukrainian territory east of the Dnieper. It takes Odessa. It leaves Ukraine landlocked, and it ensures that by giving warning to one and all that it will destroy any military infrastructure, military personnel from the West that try to come in and support Ukraine. That Ukraine must be free of any foreign military presence, or they will use a rationing zone. So I think under those circumstances, with a rump Ukraine that is economically very disadvantaged, that has lost essentially its manufacturing industry and a fairly good chunk of its black earth, because black earth is not just west of Ukraine, I think, Dnieper, it's also partly in the Kherson and other oblasts of Novorossiya. This very rather poor and degraded Ukraine will be left to itself. It will not be admitted to NATO, European Union. It's not in NATO, is obvious, but not to the European Union, despite all of the promises of Ursula von der Leyen, because it will simply be too poor and too requiring of hundreds of billions of euros of investment for the 27 nations to agree to it. Nobody has the money for that or wants to have the money for it, since they're all too busy remilitarizing. Therefore, it will be a very sad country, what's left of Ukraine after this is over.
Yeah, well, this adds to the lack of logic, though, that if you know that they will lose a lot of territories, then this is when you end it. I mean, in 2019, as you know, the Rand Corporation had this report on how to extend extend Russia. That is, and it identified, pretty much every country along the Russian border which should be destabilized. and this is the think tank of the intelligence agencies. But the main logic was, we should send weapons to Ukraine and threaten NATO expansion, because this would increase Russia's commitment into Donbass. In this way, we can slowly bleed the Russians, at least of their resources. But still, this report in the essentially are presenting the argument why it could be, the counter argument, they said, well, if it breaks into a full-scale war and the Russians begin to take strategic territory, then this war is no longer benefiting us. So translated into the last 4 years of proxy war, for NATO, it seems that it would be ideal to just have the Russians and Ukrainians fight each other. If these front lines are stable and they just kill each other in huge numbers and the Russians bleed resources, that would be a good war. But once the Russians begin to win, the casualties overwhelmingly goes in the disfavor of the Ukrainians, and they begin to lose territory, then for NATO it's a bad war. But so yeah, still, for the life of me, I can't understand why we're still doing this. I mean, this is the point in time you counter your losses and put an end to it, but there doesn't seem to be any appetite at all.
Putting an end to it would mean that those who have invested all of their political capital in its continuation would be forced out of office. And I think there's a big contradiction between the national interest and the personal interest of the leadership in at least 25 out of 27 of the member states of the European Union. So they're in it for the same reason that Netanyahu is continuing the war, because the moment he stops continuing the war, he'll be going to prison. The same reason why Zelensky is continuing the war, regardless of the massive loss of life of his men. And that is, as soon as he stops the war, there'll be an election, he'll be voted out of office, or simply be murdered. These are regrettably the deep corruption in these societies involved, where there is a contradiction between the personal interests of the leaders and the national interests of the people who put them in power.
That's never a good thing. Well, not when you get rational policies, at least. So, well, thank you very much for taking the time. These are crazy times indeed. Again, if any of this would have happened during the Cold War, it would have been something that would have dominated the pages of the history books. But it seems to become almost a daily occurrence, this kind of reckless escalation. So thank you, and have a great weekend.
But you